Welcome to Glenda Blasts Your Ear Off, flash fiction stories written by Josh Busch and narrated by Glenda Villamar. Enjoy! You have 1,440 minutes in a day. Use 5 of those minutes and visit freerice.com to play trivia games and help end world hunger. freerice.com. If you would like to donate to help support the podcast, you can donate at ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi.com. And you can also buy our ebook anthology, compiling the stories from our first 10 episodes. You can find our book on lulu.com. Please subscribe to us on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. Episode 14, A Purple, Part 1. When he awoke, the first thing he could feel was the mud on the back of his head. The mud was wet, and he realized his entire body was resting on a pile of mud. And he also realized he had not the faintest of clues of how he had come to be in this position. But he wasn't terrified. Instead, just curious. A woman's face was over his face, and she screamed at someone else, "He's awake! Told you he wasn't going to die!" Then a second face loomed over him, that of a man with an unkempt beard and bushy eyebrows, who greeted him. "Tanner, good to see you awake. We've come to take you home." "My name is Tanner? Home? Where's home? And who are you?" The woman, who had a hooked nose, spoke softly. What in the world? How could he not know who we are? The bearded man raised his eyebrows. "He must have been magicked with a spell of forgetting. Tanner, your name is Tanner. Your home is Banksford. I'm Dominic. Now let's get you up and out of the mud, shall we?" As Dominic and the woman helped Tanner up, the woman said, "And I'm Layla, in case anyone is wondering." When Tanner stood up, he said, "Nice to meet you both." Layla looked up to the sky and marveled aloud. Wow, they really did a number on him. He really doesn't know who we are. Tanner looked around at his surroundings. He was in the middle of a town. He had been laying in the middle of a street. The buildings were 2 stories and 3 stories tall, and Tanner could smell the smoke that coughed out from the chimneys. The people were clad in wool and leather. Most of the people on the street wore swords, axes, or bows. Some were on horses, and there were also carts being pulled by horses. There seemed to be no order to the flow of the people, just chaos to the comings and goings of the people suffering in the wet cold. Dominic urged, "Come with us, away from the main flow of traffic." Following them, Tanner asked, "You said you're taking me home. I don't remember anything at all. What can you tell me about home?" Layla began, "Well, for starters, you're..." But Dominic cut her off. "Layla, stop. Let me do the talking." Layla huffed and spit on the ground. "Whatever you say." Dominic smiled broadly and agreed. "Yes, I'm your leader, so it is whatever I say it is. Now, Tanner, in your home, you are valued. You have much worth. You are very special." Tanner raised his eyebrows. He didn't feel special. He just felt confused. Tanner was glad that he had a home to go to. Most of the people on the street seemed destitute, without any prospects. "Why am I special?" Dominic put a hand on Tanner's back. "Because you are a purple." They made their way to the side of the street and joined a group of people. Tanner thought there were 10 or 12 of them, perhaps. They all had on brown leather armor like Dominic and Layla. All of them had swords out. Some of the lot looked around, seemingly looking out for danger, and some looked at Tanner, with relief written on their eyes. Tanner wondered what a purple was. Dominic and Layla were getting chummy with the rest of the soldiers. Yes, that's what they were, a band of motley-clad soldiers. They all started to walk, in what Tanner could only assume was the direction of Banksford. Dominic rejoined Tanner and walked by his side. Tanner asked him, "So what's a purple?" Dominic rubbed his beard. "Anything coming back yet? Do you remember anything about magic?" "Magic? No. I definitely don't remember anything about magic, or anything else. So I will get my memory back? Dominic shook his head reassuringly. Yes, you're going to get your memory back in due time. When? I don't know. I'm no wizard. I work for one, but I'm no wizard. So, you're a purple. There are 4 types of people in this world. I mean, there are 4 types of people in the world with magic in them. Yellows, oranges, blues, and purples. Purple have the most. Tanner, in a small voice, said, "Does that mean I'm a wizard?" Dominic looked suddenly wary and angry all at the same time, but then the flash of emotion went away, to be replaced with his calm demeanor. "No, you're not a wizard, but our master is, and to him you're very special. He has great need of you. Wizards need yellows, oranges, blues, and purples in order to cast their magic. You are special because you help our master cast the greatest of spells." Tanner couldn't believe it. He was some sort of repository of magic? How is that even possible? Are there many yellow, oranges, blues, and purples in the world? No, there are not. That's why you are special, Tanner. Tanner looked ahead, and as he did so, he saw Layla had stopped walking. She seemed to have been pushed back by something that Tanner couldn't see, but as he looked closer, he saw that something was sticking out of her back. It was an arrow. An arrow had struck her in the front and had gone completely through her chest, and was now sticking out of her back. Tanner could see the point of the arrow, and it was red from her blood. Layla fell to her knees in a heap. The soldiers around Tanner came to life, and Dominic screamed, "Form up! Around the purple! Defend him with your very lives!" The soldiers obeyed, and they obscured much of Tanner's view of the battle. What he could see was 8 or so enemy soldiers garbed in greens. They all had bows, and Tanner could hear the wisps of wind as arrows shot at them. Dominic's soldiers groaned as they were hit. Dominic roared, "Attack them head on! Charge!" Dominic pushed Tanner behind himself and said, "Stay behind me, Purple. Stay safe. Stay alive." Tanner watched as Dominic's brown-clad soldiers attacked the green soldiers. One of the green soldiers caught Tanner's eye. She had long, bright red hair, and she moved quicker than anyone in the battle. With seemingly no effort at all, she slashed the necks of 2 enemy soldiers, and on her shoulder was a black squirrel. The squirrel jumped onto one of Dominic's soldiers, onto his face, and the squirrel tore at one of the man's eyes. The man dropped his sword, trying to pull the squirrel away, but then a nearby soldier took the opportunity to stab the man on the ground. But the soldiers in green were losing. Tanner was sad for the red-haired woman and her black squirrel. He did not want to see them die. The woman looked right at Tanner, locked eyes with him, looked away, and she howled in frustration. She screamed, "Retreat! Retreat!" The soldiers in green, what few of them were left of them, ran. Dominic yelled, "Stay! Don't give chase! Stay! Protect the purple!" Part 2. Tanner was glad that they had finally stopped walking. He was so exhausted. Tanner lay on the damp earth on his side in the fetal position. They had walked for hours and hours at a brisk pace, constantly expecting to be attacked. Besides Tanner and Dominic, only 3 others had survived the battle in the city. Tanner was racked in guilt that the others had died to protect him. Out of the corner of his eye, Tanner barely saw the others putting together a camp of sorts. It was nearly dark in these woods. It was cold, but Dominic forbade them to build a fire, so as not to draw the attention of anyone who'd be interested in their purple. On the way here, Tanner had asked Dominic, "How do you know I'm a purple? When I look at myself, I don't see purple." 2 of the soldiers had chuckled at his naive question. Dominic answered, "Don't mind them, Tanner. Only wizards can see the yellow, orange, blue, and purple on a person. But wizards make little pieces of glass that us non-wizards can use to see the color tint on a person. There's a purple tint on me?" Dominic assured him, "Oh yes. When I use a piece of spelled glass, I can see it plain as day. It's wrapped around you like a blanket, around your whole body." Now that the camp was put together, the others were sitting around Tanner. It was so cold and damp. He wished for the warmth of a fire, but he was glad the trees blocked much of the wind. Dominic shook Tanner. "Get up and have something to eat. But first, go pee, but don't go too far." Tanner reluctantly sat up. His legs were sore. He knew tomorrow they'd be even more sore. He walked slowly away from camp. He tried hard not to step on any branches, so as not to snap any and alert any chasers to where they were in the woods. When Tanner was done going to the bathroom, he saw a squirrel bouncing in the woods, from tree to tree. For a second, Tanner thought it was the red-haired woman's black squirrel from the battle. But how could it be? They were miles and miles from that city. The squirrel got closer. It stopped 3 feet in front of Tanner, cocked its head at him, and jumped on him. All Tanner could think of was how the black squirrel had gone for the man's eye, and so Tanner covered his eyes with his hands. The squirrel was on Tanner's shoulder. It chittered in his ear. "I won't hurt you. We don't have much time. Now look at me." Tanner warily pulled his hands down and looked at the squirrel. It was black. The squirrel held a golden nut in its hands. The squirrel said, "No time for questions. They'll come for you any second if you delay. Take this nut. It's magical. Use it when your need is most dire. You crush it and you throw it. Now take it." Tanner took the nut out of the squirrel's tiny hands, and the squirrel jumped onto a tree, and another tree, and another, and then Tanner couldn't see the squirrel anywhere. There was so little light in the sky that Tanner couldn't get a proper look at the nut, but he stuffed the nut into his pants pocket and walked back to the camp. Tanner wished he'd hurry up and get his memory back. How else could he make sense of what was going on? Magic? Talking squirrels? Dominic offered Tanner dried deer meat and blueberries. He hadn't realized how hungry he'd been, and so Tanner wolfed down the food so quickly that blueberry juice ran down his chin. Shortly after, Tanner fell asleep, but before he did, he prayed that he'd have his memory back in the morning. Part 3. Much to Tanner's dismay, his memory hadn't come back in the morning. They had been walking for 3 hours when Tanner spied Bankston in the distance. He was glad at the prospect of not having to walk anymore. That was for sure. Tanner was getting nervous about returning to this home of his that he just couldn't make himself remember. And with his memory being gone, would he even still be a purple? Would his master be able to access his magic? If not, would he be tossed aside? Where would he live then? Tanner recalled the sorry state of the previous town. How hard life looked for the people there. He didn't want to end up like them. Tanner asked Dominic, "I don't even know the name of our master. Is he a good master?" Several of the soldiers shared glances with one another and stared at Dominic. Dominic cleared his throat. "Our master, your master, is named Florian, and he is a fair master. He need not be, but he is." "Fair. I like the sound of that. What is our home like?" Dominic responded coolly. "Florian's home has many rooms, 15. Many live there. We never go hungry." Tanner was glad to hear this. He liked the idea of having many friends and to never be without food. In an hour, they had made it to Bankston, and Tanner was thankful they hadn't been attacked in the morning like the soldiers had been afraid of. Tanner was warm and sweaty from the hard walk. His stomach itched, so he lifted his shirt to give himself a good scratch, but he stopped when he saw his stomach. His entire stomach was covered in small scars. They were about 1 inch in length, hundreds upon hundreds of them. Tanner lifted his shirt higher and saw even more scars. He took his shirt completely off and saw his arms were also littered with so many scars. The scars on his arms were the freshest. Some hadn't even completely healed yet. A woman passing by yelled, "Take it all off, honey. Mama likey." Tanner could barely breathe. What had caused so many small cuts to be all over his body? Dominic grunted. "Put your shirt back on, Tanner." He did, but it took Tanner a while because he shook in fear. "What is this? How did I get all these cuts?" Dominic said in a quiet voice, "We're almost home. Florian will explain all." Tanner felt like running. "But I don't want to wait to find out why I have so many scars. So many." The soldiers surrounded Tanner. There would be no running away now. Tanner knew it then. He was such a fool. Florian's spells must need the blood of a purple, his blood. Why had it never occurred to him to ask why he had left Florian's home in the first place? Now he knew it must have been to escape Florian and his knives that cut him over and over. Tanner whimpered, and Dominic consoled him. "It's not as bad as you think. It could be worse." "How could it possibly be worse?" Dominic stated simply, "We live in a cruel world, Tanner. A cruel world." A soldier on each side of Tanner grabbed him by his arm. There would be no escaping them, not this time. That's when Tanner remembered the squirrel's magical nut in his pocket, but he didn't know if he could get at it with the soldier's hand on each of his biceps. Tanner was walked into Florian's home, which was a decrepit mansion. The ceilings were tall. Most of the windows were covered, and the walls were painted black, so there was hardly any light. Tanner wanted to scream. He stopped walking, but both of his captors dragged him along anyway. Tanner knew it was useless to fight, so he started walking again. Tanner was pushed into a large room, and he saw an impossibly old man sitting at a desk with candles all over it, and scrolls, animal skulls, bowls of who knew what, and nasty-looking tools. Florian, for who else could it have been, laughed and said in his horrible voice, "Welcome home, my little purple, my little birdie, back into your cage with you." Tanner saw the cage. It was a tall rectangle, 3 feet wide and 4 feet long. There was a pile of rags on its floor. That was the last place in the world Tanner wanted to go. So somehow he managed to wrench free from one of the soldiers, found the nut, crushed it, and threw it at Florian. A bright light flashed, and there was power in the spell. It sent everyone in the room sprawling, and they were thrown like rag dolls. Tanner hurt all over, but he wasn't in the cage, so he didn't mind all that much. There were voices from where they'd come in from. It was a right ruckus. There were shouts, the sound of metal on metal. It was a battle. Tanner got up, and so did everyone else. Florian glared his emaciated visage at Tanner. "You're going to regret having done that, I'll have you know." He turned his attention towards the battle in his home. "Now, who dares storm my gates?" And through the door, a flood of green-clad warriors rushed in. At the front was the red-haired woman, and with no trouble at all, she was gutting Florian's soldiers and nimbly dancing her way towards Tanner. There was also a tall woman in a green gown, with a staff, and from it erupted a 2-foot by 2-foot blue beam of light that shot out, and it hit Florian so hard that the beam cut the old wizard into 2 pieces. Dominic was all that stood between Tanner and the red-haired woman. Tanner saw the black squirrel on the woman's shoulder, and Tanner could have sworn that the squirrel winked at him. Dominic said, "Oh no," and 3 seconds later, the red-haired woman was pulling her sword out of Dominic's stomach. The woman ran to Tanner, and with her bloody sword still in her hand, hugged him. Tanner liked the way it felt. He just wished he could remember who she was. Tanner whispered in her ear, "The spell took my memory. Who are you?" Not letting go for anything, the woman breathed, "I'm your wife, and it's been too long, far too long since I've last held you, Tanner." Not knowing what else to say, Tanner said, "Thank you for rescuing me." The black squirrel, still on his wife's shoulder, said, "I wonder if there's any nuts in here. I'll go look." The end. Thank you for listening to today's episode. We look forward to bringing you the next episode in Glenda Blasts Your Ear Off.